program called Aggression Management, where you become an aggression manager. That's a 2-day program. I have you for 2 hours. So I'm going to try to give you in this 2 hours as many skills as I am able that you can put in your pocket and go out and use. I am very heartened by listening to Jimmy earlier and Chuck, because many of the questions they bring up, I have answers to. So I look forward to sharing them with you, and let's get started right away. First, I'd like to share an exercise with you. How many people in the room have ever heard of cycle breathing? Okay, very good. What we're going to do is, what I'd like you to do is put everything aside for a moment, sit up straight in your chairs, put your feet flat on the floor, hands comfortably in your laps, take a deep breath, and as you do, close your eyes. Envision a glass of water filling up to the very brim. And as you exhale, exhale it all the water from that glass. Breathe in, filling up your lungs to the very brim. And as you do, exhale all of the water from that glass. Now, with our eyes still closed, I'd like you to begin what we call cycle breathing. We will breathe in to the count of 4, hold to the count of 2, exhale to the count of 4, hold to the count of 2. So let's begin. Breathe in, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 1, 2. Exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 1, 2. And then breathe in again and carry on that process. Embed this in your mind, and we'll explain the details of why we're doing and why it's so important. But continue that process. Now, with your eyes still closed, I'd like you to move your fingers, move your toes, let a little bit of light in at a time. And when your eyes are fully open, please glance up here so I can see that I have you back. Now, let's talk about this for a moment. We're going to talk about the aggression environment. So why is that so important? When we become angst, when aggression is put upon us, and we start to see the emergence of aggression around us, and because you're going to learn here how to do that, the first thing that we tend to do when we become angst like this, we go, what? Or we do the opposite, we start to hyperventilate. Hyperventilate. Either way, not enough oxygen gets to the brain, and we begin to not think clearly. You see, law enforcement found this some time ago, when they would ask an officer would be notified of an incident, and they would go through more anxiety getting to the incident than once they were there. That anxiety caused them to breathe fast and shallow, so when they got there and they stepped out of their vehicle, all too often they acted ineffectively and unprofessionally. They needed a solution. So they went to the military, who had developed this technique for some of the most dire sets of circumstances. It's called cycle breathing. So why is cycle breathing so important to us? Why does it work? Well, think about it again. When we become angst, what do? Or we start to hyperventilate. Either way, not enough oxygen gets to the brain, we can't think clearly, and we act ineffectively and unprofessionally. What they learned was that what cycle breathing does is it controls the breathing rate, doesn't it? So what's so important about that cycle? Breathing into the count of 4, hold to the count of 2, exhale to the count of 4, hold to the count of 2. What is so powerful about that? It's the hold. That's what's important. Now, they found out there was something else that was also very powerful about this, is that it controlled the adrenaline rush. Why is that important? Well, think about it. You have an aggressor whose adrenaline is already pumping. It is a natural human response for your adrenaline to rise to prepare you for attack. What are you going to do with that adrenaline? All too often we wind up exacerbating, actually escalating the aggression. We need a way of controlling that adrenaline, and ladies and gentlemen, cycle breathing gives us that method. Now, let me share with you, the worst time to practice cycle breathing is in front of an aggressor. You need to practice it. You need to practice as you drive to work. You need to practice it as you drive home at night. When you put your head on the pillow, you practice again. You practice it, practice it, practice it, so that it becomes yours. So even under the most dire sets of circumstances, you can begin to do your cycle breathing. Now, we do a combination of cycle breathing along with visualization that enables us to be most effective in the most dire sets of circumstances. Because what happens to us is that our mind starts spinning for a solution that provides us so that we can win. And in the absence of that solution, our mind tends to spiral out of control. And that's where we get into trouble. Cycle breathing keeps our minds forward, our ability to respond in the most effective way. Now, I'm going to do something here a little special. I'm going to ask you to, there's a video clip you're going to see here, and I'm going to ask you in this video clip to identify the terrorist, or terrorist plural. I'm going to ask you to identify a terrorist because, like a terrorist, the perpetrator of murder-suicide is the most lethal form of aggressor. You're going to learn that very shortly. We're going to go into that a lot of detail. But the key is we're hearing more and more, and I heard a lot about it this morning, the murder-suicide. These are the most lethal kinds of aggressors. We need to be able to identify them so that we can engage before their horrific moment of commitment and prevent it from occurring. So what I'm going to share with you is a 2-minute clip, a little over 2-minute clip, and during this I'm going to ask you to identify the terrorist. But I'm not going to, at the end of the video, tell you who it is. But during this process of 2 hours with you, I am going to share with you how you identify that terrorist or murder-suicide. So let's begin, please. Just put the arrow on the dot there and hit the left key there. There we go. That looks like it should be coming. Let me have a quick look at this. That's all right. That's all right. Okay, you got that over it, and then just hit that button. Here. You know what may have happened is that when we had it off, you closed it and opened it back up. That may have interfered.
It may have lost the connection to the internet.
Yeah. Well, no, it's not an internet connection. All right, let's go here. Nope, go back and go here. There we are. At the end of the 2 hours, we will discuss who it is, and if you haven't identified it, I will share with you who the terrorists or terrorists are. But during this process, I'm going to share with you how you identify this person, which is far more important, a skill set. So, what I want to share with you, our objective during this time is to explain to you how very important it is for us to identify this individual before their moment of commitment. You see, recent studies have demonstrated that from the moment of commitment, that's when a person pulls a weapon and starts firing it, to the moment of completion, that's when the last round is discharged, is as little as 2 seconds. So if your objective is to react to that, you will do so over those slain during those first 2 seconds, at minimum. That is ineffective, in my view, irresponsible, and ultimately indefensible. You must get out in front of that horrific moment of commitment, and we're going to show you how. To further solidify this, I'm very proud of the fact that I did a keynote presentation for ESI, the Executive Security International, at their annual conference. And what we learned there about how do you protect an executive or a person of a celebrity of some sort, how do you protect that or a pastor? And you learn very quickly. This is the work of Gavin de Becker. Many of you have probably heard of Gavin de Becker in his book, Just 2 Seconds. I had one of the first copies of it, and I couldn't put it down. Because what you learn is that if your objective is to protect an individual, now realize you're with that individual. The assailant comes from somewhere else. And what did we learn? The vast majority of them, 81% of the assailants are within 25 feet of their victim. In other words, that individual knows that they're either going to die on the spot or they're going to be captured and may well die after they've killed their individual. But the key thing to understand is that if you are 15 feet away from the assailant, you're with the executive. If you're 15 feet, you have an 18% chance of protecting your charge, the victim. In other words, there is an 88% chance that that person you're there to protect is going to die. If you are 7 feet from the assailant, there's a 45% chance you can protect your executive. In other words, there is an over half a chance that your executive's going to die if you're 7 feet away from the assailant. Only if you are within arm's length of that assailant and in the now, do you have a 97% chance of protecting your client. Well, what does that mean in a church setting? You must get out in front of that horrific moment of commitment. We're going to show you how to do that. It is important to illustrate, to put this concept of aggression management into context. First, realize that the current methods being used to address aggression are not working. They are called conflict resolution and anger management. Conflict resolution is flawed because it presupposes conflict. You're already reacting, you're already past any chance to prevent it. And because there are individuals who express their conflict with violence, as we've seen in the video clips earlier, it is essential for us to get out in front of conflict. We again are going to show you how to do that. Anger management is equally as flawed because you and I, we can experience and express the same anger differently. It's very difficult to measure and therefore very difficult to manage. Right, Carl? We live in a world that only when you can measure something can you truly manage it. Anger management fails us. In fact, I believe that anger management is a misnomer because it is okay to be angry. It is not okay to be aggressive. Once you make that distinction, your world changes. What I'm going to share with you are human skills. I'm going to share with you the reflection of aggression in body language, behavior, and communication indicators that are relevant for all humans, regardless of culture, gender, education, age, or hierarchy in a community. That's first to remember. Secondly, anytime when we talk about aggression, we must make a distinction between assertive behavior and aggressive behavior. Assertive behavior says, I'm going to win because I'm going to be the best that I can be. That is constructive and that is positive. Whereas aggressive behavior says, I'm going to win because I'm going to take you out. That is destructive, that is negative. Yet I hear people constantly telling people to go out and be aggressive. And if that's so, where does good aggression end and bad aggression begin? Ladies and gentlemen, we must make the distinction between assertive and aggressive to start turning our world around a bit. In our context, aggression is always destructive and negative. There is a cost to aggression, and as was illustrated by Jimmy and of course Chuck before, the human cost that still brings tears to the eye, the human cost both of death and injury are profound. And the obvious financial costs that are associated with that are also profound, aren't they? On an institution. But there's another cost of lower levels of aggression that I want to share with you, because a lot of you have expressed, well, all right, I see this little bit of aggression. How do I know it's connected with this? How do I know that something like bullying will ultimately could be something that could be violence? Well, I'm going to share with you how they are connected. But I want to talk to you about the lower. We tend to get transfixed on the subject of violence because that's what brings our attention to first. But when we talk about the lower levels of aggression, I happen to have the honor of working with Aon Corporation for about 3.5 years. Aon Corporation is the largest insurance broker in the world. And they had conducted a survey. This is what drew me to them. They had conducted a survey in the United Kingdom of the Royal Mail where they identified the cost of employee friction. We're not talking about assaultive behavior here or violent behavior, but simple employee friction was costing them £247 million a year. You see, what they identified and more importantly measured was that when you have an aggressor in your organization, nobody else wants to be there. That regarding workplace violence, but also when you have people who represent you in a church. The same thing goes. People start coming in late. They come home, they go home early, they stay longer at lunch. There's even a new term today called presenteeism. The person's checked in, they're there, but they're so distracted by another's aggression, they might as well be absent because they're certainly not productive. So how do we identify the emergence of aggression, the early stages of aggression, so we can prevent it from becoming the murder, suicide, or rapist, or any of these other things through the understanding and identifying of aggressive behavior at the earliest possible moments? That's what you're going to learn about today. You see, there is one element that regardless of whatever the relationship you may have, there is one element that is required. If it's going to be a natural, true relationship, whether it's a business relationship, a church relationship, or a personal relationship, that element is what? Trust. Trust. Aggression at the lower levels undermine trust. You're going to see that. It's important to get an understanding. If it's important for you to have teamwork, we talked about who should be on the team, you have to have a strong team relationship, right? You got to have trust to have a good, strong relationship in a team. You want leadership, you want people to emerge as good, solid leaders, you have to have trust. How about loyalty? It requires trust. You start capturing aggressive behavior at the lower levels, and you will enhance your ability to form an effective team. Enhance the opportunity for people to evolve as leaders, and enhance the loyalty that we all should engender. So, although we tend to get transfixed on the higher levels of aggression, let's not forget the true value is identifying aggression at its earliest possible moments, engaging and preventing it, seeing the precursors to that aggression, getting out in front of it, and actually preventing it. So, the problem that we also have is that many of the methods that we apply today only react to it. You heard Chuck early on saying, we have to be proactive. I submit to you that you can be proactively reactive, and that's not good enough. You have to be preventive. Stand squarely on prevention, because you'll learn the capability of doing that. But we invest our money in things that react. And I'm not suggesting for a moment they're not important. We learn a lot from what happened, that horrific experience at Virginia Tech. We learn a lot from it because it was studied infinitum. We know so much about it. It offers us a great deal as to our way we must approach our future. And one of the things when we asked them, I was privy to a call between Duke University and Virginia Tech about a year after it occurred. And I asked the question, or the question was asked, well, what have you invested? I mean, yes, you've had this horrific experience, but you've also had the resources of the globe brought to your attention. So what have you put your mind to? What have you decided to do to make your campuses safe? Here's what they've done. They invested in crisis management. As important as that is, you realize that that is an investment in a crisis that already exists. There is no prevention in crisis management. Threat assessment, by its definition, is an assessment of a threat that already exists. Now, our hope is that we identify a lesser threat and thereby prevent a greater threat, right? But the reality is there is no way of knowing that the lesser threat might be a threat to life and limb. There's no prevention. Conflict resolution we've already discussed, and then of course they invested in emergency responders, an excellent thing to invest in. But what are they responding to? A crisis. No prevention there. Likewise, we often are under the misinformation that somehow through mental illness or profiling we can identify the next shooter. I'm sorry, it doesn't work. Let me explain why. First of all, mental illness. Mental illness, the people in this community have really had a challenge because it has been expected of them that they can identify the next shooter, and it doesn't work. Why? Well, let's take a look. The study completed by, again, the report to the President on issues raised at Virginia Tech tragedy. Here's the report, very thoroughly done. Most people who are violent do not have mental illness, and most people who have mental illness are not violent. That's the rub. In fact, they found out people with mental illness tend to be the victims of this behavior, not the perpetrators of it. You see, even Sung-Hee Cho, the one who committed that heinous crime, was evaluated on 3 different occasions. And in each and every occasion, he was deemed to be depressed and anxious, but not at risk to himself or others. Let's take a more recent case. Jared Loughner, the Tucson shooter that shot Congresswoman Gabby Earl Gifford. Here's a man who clearly has a thought disorder. He may be schizophrenic, but the vast majority of people with schizophrenia are not violent. They do not shoot people. What we're talking about is the difference between probabilities and predictability. If this person is, because they have schizophrenia, maybe they have a 3% chance of being the next violent person. Does that get us anywhere from the probability of 3% to the predictability that they're the next shooter? No. That's the problem. Let's take a look at profiling. We are told by our experts that we must be profiling because profiling will help us identify the next shooter. I'm sorry, it's not so. One of the most thorough studies ever done between the U.S. Secret Service and the Department of Education to identify the next school shooter, called the Safe School Initiative. Many of you may have read it. It is an outstanding and thorough study, and the people who work with the Secret Service, their expertise was assassinations. So this is adult as well as child directed. So what did we learn from this? There is no accurate or useful profile for a school shooter, nor for assessing the risk that a particular student may pose for school-based targeted violence. You see, what they identified, what we've known all along, is that what profiling does do is that it tells us that within a certain group of people, there's a higher probability of a shooter. It does not, let me repeat, it does not tell us who the next shooter is. It doesn't offer us predictability, it offers us probability. Now, does that mean you should take your eyes off the person who's high probability? Absolutely not. Obviously, you should keep an observation on this person, but it doesn't tell you who the next shooter is. But this study goes on, and it's very enlightening in the way that it does. You see, what it goes on to say is, an inquiry should focus instead on a student's behavior and communication to determine if a student appears to be planning or preparing for an attack. It goes on to say, the ultimate question to answer is whether a student is on a path to violence, and if so, to determine how fast they're moving and where intervention is possible. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, you have to identify the emergence of aggression. If you're observing the emergence of aggression through body language, behavior, and communication process, in other words, you will see the precursors to the next level of aggression and thereby have the ability to get out in front and actually prevent it from occurring. That has been the basis of my work over the last 18 years. And that's what I'm going to share with you now. You've asked yourselves, and I've heard the question asked, well, how do we build a program that will actually prevent the next church shooting? Well, first of all, it has to be predicated on emerging aggression. Does everybody get that? It has to be based upon emerging aggression, identifying the aggression as it emerges. Then, and I heard it mentioned before, Jimmy spoke about having eyes and ears, right? Well, we agree, you cannot train all people with all skills, right? So we need to have something that's scalable. So we recommend you have an army of trained observers. We call them aggression-first observers. These are individuals trained, they're people on the front line, trained to identify measurable observables. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot go on using subjective references like scary, strange, and weird. It will overwhelm you. I work primarily with colleges and universities, and I go all over the country working with them, and what I find is that they form a behavioral intervention team. Usually the behavioral intervention team will be made up of the director of security, the director of mental health on campus, and the vice president of student affairs, and a variety of people under those people, often conduct related, that sort of thing. And they announce to the campus that we now have a program in place. Share with us anything you have that you see as suspicious. And they get deluged with all kinds of scary, strange, and weird types of references. And they have to pursue each and every one of them, lest they become more liable because they didn't do their due diligence, right? So we must have a plan that works, and the only way to have a plan, as Jimmy pointed out, is that we have to have a team of aggression-first observers. We train them with the observable, measurable, and objective observables that they can call in to you, the aggression managers, what we sometimes call qualified responders. People who are trained to measure the emergence of aggression, engage with just the right skill sets to maximize their result. In other words, you don't need to use a sledgehammer when a tapping hammer will do. Because if you're measuring emerging aggression, you can decide what skill sets. We don't expect a lot of these murderous people. We expect a lot of mid-range aggression that you'll have to address, and you need to address it in a sophisticated and effective way. And then it is important to have a foundation of those measures. We call it the meter of emerging aggression. It is a software platform that literally enables you to put in these measurable observables given to you in a drop-down. It tells you what level of aggression this person is, thereby the presumption of threat, and what kind of skills, what resources do we need to approach this person to maximize our result. Not just to prevent, but to maximize our result. Here's a visual illustration of what we're talking about. Here we have the first observers. And who should first observers be? Anyone who you deem is responsible enough to handle that position, who can learn these measurable observables and call them into you, so that you can respond effectively. Anybody on the front line, I would say. So these first observers see an aggressor. They call it into you, the aggression managers. You turn to your software platform, you put in what's given to you, it'll immediately read out what level of aggression this person is, and you can then therefore determine what resources you need to approach this person and take what action, if any, to diffuse this individual prior to it becoming an incident. I want to share with you what most of us think of as aggression in this video clip. Again, it's a very short video clip. Chuck, if you'll roll that for me. This is what most people see as aggressive behavior. Excellent.
got a major problem on our hands. Remember those 3,000 swizzle loops that we pulled for breakage? Somehow we got shipped to 500 stores. We've got an injury of bosses furious. Now how did this happen, George?
You blame me for this. I can take responsibility for every screw up around here. Who the hell are you going to yell at me and
It's your part to tell. As far as the boss is concerned, it's your butt that's on the line, not mine. Now let's try to...
forget it? I'm going to call me and settle this with you.
The hell you are. And we've got to settle this right now.
How many times did I cover for you when you first got here? So butt out.
And you are history.
Move it, mister. I'll put your face at it. I mean it.
The only thing you're pushing is 60.
That is what most people understand as aggression. Some of you may have even experienced that coming in this morning, or things like this. But you see, what I'm going to introduce you to here is the aggression continuum. And what we hope you gain from this is that aggression is simply made up of parts. And if you understand those parts, and you have the skills which we're going to share with you, then you can diffuse most aggression. So let's dissect this for a moment. One of the first things that we see here as we look at this is that we have a trigger phase, an escalation phase, and a crisis phase. And as someone escalates up this continuum of aggression, this thermometer of aggression, their quality of judgment diminishes. So what do we learn from that? Is it fair to say that if we allow someone to continue aggressing, that at some point they will go beyond our ability to diffuse them and become assaultive? Is that fair to say? Sure. But we would like you to focus on just the opposite. The earlier you identify the emergence of aggression, the easier it'll be for you to diffuse this person. Does everybody get that? The earlier you identify the emergence of aggression, the easier and less skills required to diffuse this individual. So with that in mind, let's take a look here. How many people here have heard of Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman? Very good. I'm very proud to say that Dave Grossman wrote the foreword to my book. And it was on the process that I went through that Dave and I become friends. It's hard to be a good friend with Dave because he's on the road all the time. I mean, 360 of the 365 days a year, this man is in presentations. But Dave is this brilliant guy, and back some time ago, he and Bruce Siddle, who's a renowned researcher in the area of law enforcement, got together and they did that initial research, the measures that I spoke to you about. You have to have measures in order to manage. This is back nearly 18 years ago when I met him. He and Bruce Siddle were the people who worked out that connection between aggression, the production of adrenaline, the increase in the heart rate, and the resulting body language and behavior that we can identify and measure. That's the key, and measure. Now, Bruce and Dave did not care a great deal about where aggression came from, because as military or law enforcement, you already have an aggressor. So I went to people to identify where this aggression actually originated. I went to Dr. Joseph Ledoux, Archibald Hart, and others that had done an enormous amount of research in the area of anxiety and adrenaline, and realized that this aggression began when a person stopped coping with their anxiety. When they stopped coping, regardless of what it was or the cause, when they stopped coping, that threat mechanism went off in the brain, it started producing adrenaline. That was the beginning of aggression. All I did was connect the dots. I was the mechanic who screwed it together. And from that, what we have, but let's look at the basis of the research. Now, this is adrenaline, the effects of adrenaline because of aggressive behavior, and the effects on the heart rate. So what do we have? At a resting heart rate, we have 60 to 80 beats per minute. At 115 to 145 beats per minute, it's slightly elevated. This is what the military refer to as the optimum survival and combat performance level. This is when you are trained. You're now in a stressful situation and you're doing that training. You're performing on the basis of that training. And that's actually quite good. However, this is also the point where hypervigilance begins. Anybody tell me here what a hypervigilance means? Say that louder. Always on. That's right. You're alert, vigilant, in a hyper sort of way. It's wonderfully illustrated by Dave Grossman when he talks about going into a theater and he throws a poisonous snake on the floor in the front of the theater. He said about a third of that theater will go into hypervigilance immediately. The next third will go, eh. The third will go out and sell tickets to watch the first third. But he says, if I went into that theater and I pulled out a weapon and I started shooting people, every person in that room would immediately be in hypervigilance. Because human on human aggression does that to us. So even at 115 beats to 145 beats per minute, we are already getting that sense of evolving of hypervigilance. We also are beginning to lose our creativity, our innovation, and our thoughtful consideration. Are those skill sets that we need? Yeah. These are skill sets that we need. So we cannot afford to lose those. So even at 115 to 145 beats per minute, we are already beginning to lose our ability to be effective in front of an aggressor. Now we're above 145 beats per minute, and our consciousness, remember we talked about as we escalate, our ability to think clearly diminishes. Well, here we have it. Consciousness becomes more, we start to lose our consciousness. Auto-response mode. Auto-response mode is when we are in when we are trained with something, and we're trained and we're trained and we're trained and we're trained, and we're put under these stressful situations, we now do what we're trained to do. It has often been said that under most stressful circumstances, we lower to the level of our training. Well, that's what auto-response mode means. We are trained and we are doing what we're trained to do. However, what do you suppose happens if you don't have a plan? You haven't trained for this particular occurrence? The mind starts reeling, looking for an answer where you can win, but it doesn't come. Then what happens? You start to go down a path that you later will severely, profoundly regret. You must have a plan, and that's part of why we work so diligently with auto-response mode. We work with visualizations to visualize the kinds of things that could go wrong, and here's the kinds of things that we can do and we will do under these circumstances. You write that out, and then you present it to whoever you need to present it to get an official approval on it. And once you have an official approval, you get them to put their John Henry at the bottom of it. Why? Because it puts that as part of your standard operating procedures, and by doing that, you know that your organization is going to protect you if this happens and I respond that way. So now your mind knows that if this sort of thing happens, I respond this way, then yes, I will win. Then we're above 175 beats per minute. Now we are in full automatic mode. We are doing what we are trained to do. If we have no training, we are spiraling out of control. Our breathing goes from fast and shallow, like we talked about with the officer on the way, to fast and deep. I remember watching a video clip of a highway patrolman. You know, they all have the cameras in the front now, and they have the wireless microphones so that they can all be recorded. And here's an officer who had pulled someone over for a normal infraction, was approaching the vehicle when someone spun out. You saw the revolver on the right side of the passenger side, and the next thing you hear out of his microphone is, and you think he's running. No, he's not running, because that's what happens at this level. Finally, we push it up over 185 to 220 beats per minute, and we're now working off the brain stem, as we say, the reptilian part of the brain, and this is fight or flight. Now, when I say fight, flight, or freeze, when I say fight, I don't mean effectively fight. I'm talking about flailing, because at this level you have no true conscious skills. Your primary objective is to run, to remove yourself as a target. Voiding of bladder and bowels. That's right. The body is saying, shut down everything we do not need other than what we must use for fight or flight. That's exactly what happens. Then you see submissive behavior and freezing. There is a case in LA where a serial killer approached a man in a car. The car engine was running. The car doors were closed and the windows up. The car door was locked. All the man had to do is put his foot on the accelerator and he would have been out of there. He was unable to do it. He froze. And when the serial killer said, "Open the door," what do you think he did? Submissive behavior. Now, why do you suppose I would share all of this with you? I share this with you because I don't want you to go here. And gentlemen and ladies, there is only one way not to go here. And that is what? I've just shared it with you. Cycle breathing, cycle breathing, cycle breathing. I hope you're getting it. Cycle breathing is the difference. If you practice it and make it yours, cycle breathing is the difference between becoming a casualty of this. I want to share with you, this is what we call primal aggression. I want to share with you a prime example of this kind of aggression, adrenaline-driven aggression. And I want to share with you, this actually occurred at Western Kentucky University, one of my clients, and yes, there was alcohol involved, but I want to show you what happens when someone goes through this process. Chuck, if you would start it for me. Thank you. Now, there's no volume, there's no audio with this because it's frankly laced with vulgarity, and you know that exists. You don't have to hear it from this. But what I want you to see are the visuals. This guy here is now betting, he's already had a scuffle before this, he's now betting anybody $100 if they'll fight him. And here he's going to pump himself up. You'll see that he's all red in this area. That's part of this adrenaline rush. And you'll see here that he's now making his threatening poses. His skin is flushed with blood. Now he's got to jump around. Watch. This is adrenaline moving this. Adrenaline is this aggression of someone losing control. His friend there is trying to stop him from doing it under the threat of being beat up himself. And then, of course, the cavalry arrive. What we have been sharing with you is what I call primal aggression. One of the discoveries we made 18 years ago was the difference between primal and cognitive. We realized there were two kinds of aggression. Primal aggression is built off the primal instincts of fight or flight. It is fueled by adrenaline. As we've said, that connection between aggression, the production of adrenaline, the increase in the heart rate, and the resulting body language and behavior we can identify and measure. But we also realized that this was the aggression of someone who's losing control. It is imperative that you get that point. Someone losing control. And in the extreme, we see this red-faced, ready-to-explode guy, as I call him. The red-faced, ready-to-explode guy. Isn't that a wonderful image? But once again, this is a person who's losing control. So what about conscious deliberate aggression? Where does that fit? It certainly doesn't fit here. So for that, we develop cognitive aggression. This is conscious deliberate aggression, or non-conscious in that someone repeats it often enough that they no longer give it a lot of thought and they become a vicious person. We probably know some people like that. This is built off of intent. And it's really very simple. What is your intent with this person or persons? Is it in your interest and theirs, therefore a win-win as it ought to be? Or is it in your interest and to their detriment? In other words, you're going to victimize this person. You're becoming a victimizer. Now, we're going to share with you 9 clearly defined levels of cognitive aggression. From the lowest initial levels right up through the murder-suicide, the most lethal of all aggressors. But here's the key. The first grouping are victimizers. The next group is the predators. This is a person who typically looks for easy prey. Predators look for easy prey. If you look like easy prey, if your facility looks like easy prey, like leaving the doors unlocked all day, then you tend to become their next victim. Now, it is interesting to me that I hear organizations across the country telling me that they're putting in lighting to make their parishioners and themselves safer, or employees safer. It's important to note that predators go where the lighting isn't, or where it's minimal. So unless you intend to light up your place like a penitentiary, and most are not prepared to do that, it will not deter a predator in an iota. Not an iota. Predators often have criminal intent, although they don't have to. They often have criminal intent, like a robbery. The ultimate of all predators, of all aggression, the cognitive aggression, is the terrorist or perpetrator of murder-suicide, like Mr. Zacariah Moussaoui, known often as the 20th hijacker. Now, I hope you can look at the body language and behavior of Mr. Moussaoui and notice how different it is from the red-faced, ready-to-explode. The sad thing is that the vast majority of security and law enforcement see the person on the top as their only aggressor. But in point of fact, the man on the bottom is far more lethal. In fact, Sung Hee Cho at Virginia Tech could have walked right by law enforcement, and had they not seen weapons, they would never have recognized him, because he looked so much different than what they're looking for, the red-faced, ready-to-explode guy. Now, we discovered this 18 years ago, well before terrorism and murder-suicide was in the hearts and minds of Americans. So when 9/11 happened, I found myself in front of the directors of behavioral science for both the FBI and the TSA at Quantico, at the FBI Academy. And I have to tell you, that's a very daunting place. And the director of FBI's behavioral science unit said, "I'd like you to understand that out of every 200 people who request a presentation in front of us, we permit one." He said, "That says volumes about our interest in your subject matter." At the end of the presentation, they gave us a publication that had all the devices that they were developing to identify a terrorist in an airport. And after reading it, I explained to him, I said, "The problem you have is that you're identifying the primal aggressor. red-faced, anxious, stressful, darting eyes, you know, this kind of a body language and behavior. The problem you have is that a terrorist is a cognitive aggressor. You see, the difference is that the cognitive aggressor at this level not only disconnects from their victim, this person disconnects from their own well-being to the point where they find a profound calm. Why? Because they're completely and totally disconnected from their own well-being. That's what makes this person so lethal. This person has absolutely no compunction about killing multiples of people regardless of age or gender. This is why a suicide bomber can blow themselves up with their own children in the back seat. This is why they're so lethal. You see, what we've come to realize is that when someone is prepared to give up their life for a cause and realize there's no commitment a human can make that's greater than this, right? Regardless of culture, gender, age, education or hierarchy in a community, regardless of all these things, all humans, their bodies respond to this intention by losing animation. So one of the first things, if the body says, I'm dead, and it takes on that appearance. So one of the first things that we see is what the military call the 1,000-yard stare. But it's more than that. The whole body language and behavior loses animation. The Israelis call it the walking dead. Ladies and gentlemen, that's how you identify this person. And the key is that the moment they rise to that intention, they take on that look. Prior to entering into your parking lot, prior to entering into your chapel or church, that is how you get out in front of that horrific moment of commitment. Here is the primal and cognitive aggression continuum. In other words, you have a primal aggression continuum here, showing it escalating, and the cognitive aggression here. Excuse me, I suppose I should do this on both sides here. The primal aggression continuum here, the cognitive aggression continuum there. It shows aggression from its very outset through its ultimate expression of violence. So let's further dissect this for a moment. We have a trigger phase. That's the explosions that go off on our heads. Remember George in the video? What happened to George first? What was the first thing that had happened to George in the video? He woke up late, right? Then what happened? Went in for coffee, breakfast, there was none. Now his stomach's grumbling. He gets 3/4 down the driveway. Then what happens? He forgot the garbage. These are all triggers, and we all experience them. The difference is we cope. Remember me saying that earlier? We cope. When a person stops coping, one trigger begins to accumulate on top of the next, and we enter into the escalation phase. And the key here is it changes our behavior, our body language, and the way we communicate. We as aggression managers can identify that behavior. So we're now in the escalation phase, and you notice, here's the key. Remember I told you that you had to get out in front of conflict if you truly want to prevent violence? Remember that? Well, those first three stages, stage 1, 2, and 3, are prior to conflict. You can identify the behavior, body language, and communication indicators of someone prior to conflict and thereby prevent, not react, not proact, but prevent conflict. Another term I hear a lot being used is the word bullying, right? What is bullying? It is someone exhibiting bullying behavior, right? You're already reacting to it. But once you realize that bullying behavior starts at the fourth stage of aggression, of cognitive aggression, it enables you to see levels 1, 2, and 3 get out in front and actually prevent bullying from occurring. EEOC demanded that employers teach us about discrimination. Incidentally, discrimination is at a fourth level of cognitive aggression. They told us that we told employers that we had to become aware of discrimination. And what do we do? All employers went out and they taught all about discrimination. And what happened? When you look over the last 17 years of the EEOC research, you see over the last 7 years, it soars like this. Why? Because everybody's aware of it, everybody speaks to it now, everybody records it, but nobody's preventing it. Because discrimination by its tone means you're reacting to someone who's already discriminating. It's important to understand there are 3 stages prior to that that you can get out in front of and prevent that from occurring. Same thing goes for sexual misconduct as well. You notice how this area on the escalation phase is conjoined. It's connected. Now, Michael, if I can use you as an example, here's what happens, gentlemen, ladies. One feeds off the other. I don't see myself as an aggressor, but I am an inconsiderate kind of person. Guess what? That is aggression, incidentally. I'm an inconsiderate person, and I say something that offends Michael. So what does Michael do? He gets a boost of adrenaline. He's offended. That's primal. He decides to say something to me. That's intent-driven. That's cognitive. When he says that to me, I'm now offended. I get a boost of adrenaline. That's primal. I decide to act against Michael. That's intent-driven. That's cognitive. You see how one feeds off the other? They feed off each other until they reach the crisis phase, when they begin to divert. Let's talk about that. Let's focus in on this. First of all, what did we say about primal aggressors? They're losing control, right? They're losing control. So, what do we see out of this person? In the extreme, we see someone who spirals out of control into panic and or rage. However, on the cognitive side, they become tactical. Now, when I say tactical, I don't mean well thought out, although it can be very well thought out. Sung Hee Cho chained the back of the hall so as to corral people so he could shoot and kill 32 people and wounded 25 others. Ladies and gentlemen, he intended to kill 57 people, and he wanted to go out with a real bang. But it doesn't mean that here. Tactical means this is an individual who's identified their target and they're committed to the destruction of that target. That's what it means. And their behavior reflects that. Their behavior reflects that. At the highest level, the 9th level, this is a murder-suicide or terrorist whose goal it is to give up their life for a cause. And their behavior reflects that. At the 8th level, we have the murderer, or combatant in a military sense, who's prepared to give up their life for a cause, but intend to survive, in the case of the combatant, to kill more of you tomorrow. At the 7th level, we have the complicit tactician, the person who's completely complicit with the 8th and 9th level. They want people to die, but they're not going to kill them, nor are they going to give up their life for them. They'll inspire other people to do that, like the late Osama bin Laden, or a terrorist handler, or in a domestic sense, an accomplice. The 9th, 8th, and 7th level of cognitive aggression are extremely lethal. But there are 6 levels below that enable you to identify this person before this level and prevent it from occurring. You have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 different opportunities to get out in front of this person and prevent this from occurring. Does this only happen with blue-collar workers? I'm going a little over my time, but I think this is worthwhile doing. Are these just blue-collar workers? Anybody remember Dr. Amy Bishop, University of Alabama at Huntsville? Shot and killed 3 people, and wounded 3 others, meant to kill 6 people. But let me tell you how methodical, how calm this person was. Dr. Amy Bishop taught her class that morning. She sat in that meeting to do with tenure for 40 minutes before she pulled out her weapon and started firing. Look at the look on her. If they'd only been able to identify that before this happened. Incidentally, before the school knew, the word had gotten out that people had been shot, before anybody really knew who shot whom, her students thought it was her. You see, the things that I'm sharing with you are intuitive. We see this every day, and especially you in the security business, you see this every day. These are going to be intuitive. You're going to go, yeah, I understand, I get it, as we go through these. You just haven't had a definition for them, and now that you have a definition for them, it'll cause you to respond more effectively with them. What you're about to see in this very short clip is in Kentucky Plastics Company. This young man went in and he shot and killed 5 people and then himself, a murder-suicide. I want you to notice how methodical, how calm. You will see no red-faced or ready-to-explode person here. You'll see someone who's just as calm as could be. He's killing people like he would step on an ant. Would you please play that, Chuck? Watch him as he goes around, very methodically shooting and killing people. In this next slide is the Columbine slide. Now, again, you'll see 2 young men as calm as could be. In one case, you see them drinking a glass of water, and they're just as calm as could be as they're killing people, trying to explode these bombs also. Notice how calm they are, just taking their time, methodically killing people. See him drinking his glass of water down here, and here he is drinking his water as he's going around killing people. Dave Grossman believes that bombing is going to be the way of the future because it is so easy to make these bombs and they are so devastating. It's his belief that that is the weapon of the future. If these bombs had actually gone off, the ones that they had prepared, a lot more people would have died because the building would have come down. They certainly had the capability, they just didn't have the way of executing it properly. Well, let us take a break for lunch. When we come back, we'll get into more detail on primal and cognitive aggression so you see the details of it, and get into some prevention techniques.